Amon's possible origins. Amon. Klein said the word in his mind. He had originally thought that the blasphemer who appeared in the forsaken land of the god City of Silver was a descendant of an ancient family like Amon. Through inheriting the legacy of his ancestors, step by step, he stepped into the demigod ranks. To his surprise, it was very possible that that particular person could very well have lived for more than 2,000 years, and was a member of the Amon family when it was at the peak of its strength. An old antique. Why would he, for no good reason, build a tomb for himself? Did he fake his death to get out of a situation? Or is there another reason, such as leaving traces so as to have time fixed onto his body? He was able to live from the 4th epoch to the 5th epoch, all because he was siphoning the lives of others. I originally guessed that he's a Sequence 3 or Sequence 2. Based on what I've seen today, it's not impossible for him to be a Sequence 1. After all, long periods of time would eventually bring about an intrinsic improvement. Klein switched back and forth between puzzlement and speculation. His thoughts were like boiling water, gurgling non-stop. Hue, the Horamic doll, tugged at his throat and accidentally pulled off a piece of skin, revealing the complicated mechanical structure within. His voice came out from that spot and brought with it the impression of leaking air. "Search the corpses on the ground. Don't come any closer." "Yes, Your Grace." The Cancer and company heaved a clear sigh of relief. The corpses on the ground had long since produced their Beyonder characteristics. Some of them had even combined with certain parts of the body to form a terrifying mystical item. In addition, the dead carried all sorts of items on them. The machinery hive mind sure has reaped quite a harvest this time. Together with the specter portrait frame and the human skin shadow characteristic, this completely makes up for the crazy expenses of the cleanup. A huge investment for a high return. Klein's eyes lingered on the ground for quite a while. He inhaled, tore his gaze away, and followed Horamic, who didn't carry a lantern, to the wall on the other side of the coffin. At this moment, the magic mirror, or roads, brightened up the scene, allowing the things in front of him to be seen clearly. Klein saw that the wall across him had become mottled due to the rapid weathering just now. Many of the murals had been destroyed and could no longer be restored to their original states. The only one that was more complete and could barely be seen clearly was a colorful mural at the top of the wall, which took up a small half of the dome. It described a towering mountain range, and on the highest mountain peak there was a huge cross that was taller than the mountain. The cross was covered in layers of radiance, making it seem unusually holy. In front of it, a tall and domineering figure could be seen vaguely. The mountain range was like a pet that lay prostrate at its feet. This figure was surrounded by 2-winged, 4-winged, and 6-winged angels. They were holding bugles, playing harps, or playing flutes, looking pious and sprightly. At the foot of the mountain range, 2 12-winged angels were humbly walking towards the mountain top, each holding a baby in their arms. The baby on the left had curly black hair, and the baby on the right had pale blonde hair. One of their eyes was black, the other golden. Elsewhere in the mountain range there was a vague depiction of a giant with chains at its legs and a dragon that had its legs bound and never be able to land. Horamic first looked at the baby on the left, and his genial expression became increasingly serious. He said a word in a very low voice, "Amon." Then he turned to look at the baby on the right, and after a few seconds of silence, he said another name, Adam. Amon, Adam. As Klein repeated the names, he felt that the fog that hung over the history of the 4th epoch and the 3rd epoch was growing thicker. He combined all the information he had learned and quickly made a guess. On the mountaintop, the figure in front of the glowing cross, is surrounded by angels, with giants and dragons submitting to it. It's definitely a real god that's at sequence 0. Another being who likes to partially use the cross as a symbol is the true creator. It's said that Ammon is the descendant of an ancient sun god, but the one at the top of the mountain doesn't seem like a pure sun god. Could it be that he is the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God that the City of Silver believes in? This is in accordance with the legends of the City of Silver, the awakening of the Creator who stripped the King of Giants and the Dragon of Imagination and other ancient gods of their authorities. The so-called ancient sun god is actually the Lord that created everything as spoken about in the City of Silver. He may be in charge of the domains such as sun and time. In addition, the authorities of the giant king, Urmir, and the dragon of imagination, Ankervelt, has likely returned to him. This can no longer be completely contained within sequence 0. So the original Ammon was the descendant of the City of Silver's Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God, who inherited the beyonder characteristics of the time domain. This seems to slightly explain why he remained silent in the City of Silver's dungeon for decades. Apart from him, there's also another descendant of the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God, named Adam. What did Adam inherit in the beginning? Does he still have a descendant alive, and if so, where would he be? What's the relationship between the true creator and that person? Is it simply an imitation by using the creator's title and the symbol of the cross? Or is there some deeper connection between the two? Klein didn't let his doubts show too much. After all, the magic mirror, Orodes, could be sizing him up. Horamek stared at the mural for a while, then he suddenly took a few steps forward and pressed his extended palms against the wall. Without a sound, the majestic mural disintegrated, turning into pieces of stone fragments that landed on the ground. Even the color quickly evaporated, disappearing without a trace. The Church of the God of Steam and Machinery is consciously concealing the history of the third and fourth epochs. Are the other churches the same? Klein frowned and followed the Horamek doll to the other side. After making a half circle, they discovered another thing. A stone door which only had an outline loomed in the corner. At this moment, the Horamek doll's joints were constantly creaking, but this didn't stop him from quickly approaching the stone door and reaching out with his right hand to attempt to push. Above the stone door, there was a sudden burst of aqueous light that condensed into a scene that looked so real that it seemed possible to directly touch it. Dark blue waves were surging forward, and there was a dense black mist that looked like liquid. A craggy mountain protruded from the mist, continuously flowing with viscous liquids. Behind this mountain, the black mist seemed endless, with no end in sight. There was also no limit to its depth. The deeper one looked, the more placid it felt. It was as if once something fell in, it would fall forever. What is this place? Klein's expression didn't change as he muttered inwardly. Horamek retracted his palms and watched as the scene gradually faded until it disappeared. He leaned his head back and sighed to himself while feeling perplexed. The abyss. Abyss. That's the source of all corruption. It's said that it's an abyss that can even corrupt a true god? Klein was amazed, but as a former clown, he regulated his expression and limbs to appear unperturbed. He immediately thought of something. Roselle, who was exploring the fog sea, had once deviated from his path, leaving behind a puzzling sentence. I saw the abyss. As Klein pondered about the layers of waves that were surging towards the black fog, he made a conjecture. There's an entrance to the abyss somewhere in the fog sea. Immediately after, he looked towards the stone door. He suspected that Ammon, who lurked around the City of Silver, had employed a certain ritual. After finishing the tomb, he didn't depart from it normally. Instead, he used a special tunnel to head for the abyss. Thus, in the eyes of most people, he was already dead. As for whether the City of Silver or the forsaken land of the gods was located somewhere in the abyss, Klein couldn't be sure. After all, the history of this tomb was at least 1,500 years old, so Amon had plenty of time to use the abyss to go somewhere else. Would he still occasionally come back to siphon off time? If he finds out that someone has dug up his grave, the expression on his face would definitely be very marvelous. Klein rejoiced for a baffling reason. At this moment, the Horamic doll held his left hand in his right palm and abruptly twisted it. With a creaking sound, his left hand was bent at the wrist, but there were no bones that pierced out of his skin, spewing out flesh and blood. There was a heavy black metal tube inlaid in his left wrist. His entire left arm was a small-caliber mystical cannon. To hide a mole of advanced technology, he truly is worthy of being from the machinery hive mind. However, the requirements and costs for such a thing are too high. Clearly, it could only be provided to specific personnel and not for military troops. Klein felt that today was an eye-opener for him, an opportunity to see another development path in the mysterious world. The only problem is that Beyonder characteristics are conserved. Artisans are limited, so many things cannot be mass-produced. The Horamic doll put his left wrist against the stone door. Inside his body, the sound of gears grinding against each other as they revolved emitted an intense spirituality radiance. A ray of light that was as bright as day appeared and disappeared. The stone door suddenly turned into pure powder, as if it had never existed. He destroyed the door. If Blasphemer Amon encounters an emergency situation and attempts to return here, only to find the door gone, that would be fun. Klein almost laughed when he imagined that scene. This was the end of the Amon family's tomb exploration. The scene surrounding Klein quickly shrank and became the background. An illusory, ancient, and bizarre silver mirror appeared in midair. The black eye-like gemstones on the mirror flickered. White words were quickly outlined in the mirror. Your loyal servant, Erodes, has finished reporting and is ready to serve you at any time again. Klein was a bit wary and unaccustomed towards the fellow who appeared too enthusiastic. He nodded and said, "Well done, you may leave first." Yes, the mighty existence above the spirit world. As soon as Rhodes produced that line of words, the scene around him shattered into pieces. After confirming that its power had left his dream, Klein thoughtfully said to himself, "The mighty existence above the spirit world. It really has vaguely sensed the gray fog. Does this magic mirror, with a wicked sense of humor, really wish to rely on me, or does it have some other purpose? I have to watch carefully. Otherwise, with it at the machinery hive mind, I don't want to be repeatedly blasted with cannon fire." Rounding up his thoughts, Klein began looking forward to the next day. After the machinery hive mind tidied up their spoils, they were likely to get him to choose an item. Chapter 4. 149 Better Choice. In Empress Borough, inside the opulent villa of Earl Hall, the cold air was kept out by the windows and walls. The building's interior was warm as though it were spring, and the fireplace was elegant. Audrey Hall was having her measurements taken by the fashion designer, Mrs. Guinea, so that she could create a costume for Audrey for the New Year banquet in consideration of her recent physical and emotional state. At this moment, her personal maid, Annie, came close to her ear and whispered, "Lady Escalante is here." Such a fast response. Audrey was delighted, but she didn't make an obvious show of it on her face. With a faint smile, she said, "Please get her to wait in my art studio." For 5 minutes. Art studio? Annie asked in surprise. Yes, I'd like to ask her to admire my recently completed oil painting. She says that content that is painted in a relaxed state easily allows one to express their true thoughts and emotions, Audrey explained unhurriedly. Annie suddenly felt enlightened. Yes, miss. Less than 5 minutes later, Audrey entered the studio and saw Escalante admiring the paintings on the walls. That's Mr. Cenci's Inner Heart's Night, a masterpiece that allows one to feel peace. She smiled and introduced the painting to Escalante. Cenci's Inner Heart's Night, one of the top 10 works of last year's top 100-century-old paintings that the Tusek Times voted for. Escalante was obviously the kind of person who often read newspapers. And as a beyonder of the spectator pathway, she had a good memory. Yes, Audrey replied simply, as though it was a trivial matter. I actually have the honor of seeing the real deal. Escalante looked up at the painting again. She swallowed back the words. This is worth at least a manor, unwilling to appear too Philistine. Audrey didn't continue introducing the other paintings. She found a reason to send Annie away and motioned to Susie to stand guard outside the door. Susie read her hint without any hindrance, wagged her tail, and scampered out. Escalante closed the door and went back to the easel's side. Before Audrey could ask, she took the initiative and said, We have both the human skin shadows characteristic and the wind-blessed potion formula. However, there is no need for us to sell it unless the other party is able to provide an irresistible offer. The willingness to negotiate means there's hope. Audrey's green eyes darted slightly as she asked with a chuckle, What do you wish to receive in exchange? Escalante stroked her hair and gave her pre-prepared answer. 2,500 pounds for the human-skinned shadow characteristic, and 3,000 pounds for the wind-blessed potion formula. Quite a huge premium. Although Audrey didn't find them expensive, she lamented the fact that the psychology alchemist's premium had exceeded 50%. According to the description given by the hanged man, under normal circumstances, the formula for Sequence 6 would have cost less than 2,000 pounds. But the closer it was to a high sequence, the fewer potion formulas there were to circulate, making it very difficult to buy them. There was no normal situation, and what was even more important was that, even if one chanced upon a sale, it was very difficult to ascertain their authenticity. At that moment, Escalante added, If the other party can barter with mystical items, all that's needed is for them to be of roughly the same value. That is to say, you want mystical items more and can accept a price reduction for them. The Psychology Alchemists is one of the youngest secret organizations. They clearly haven't accumulated enough in this area compared to the others. Audrey pursed her lips and said, I'll inform them, but I can't guarantee that they'll accept it. She wasn't the least bit worried that the psychology alchemist would notice that she hadn't been involved in any Beyonder gathering recently. After all, her schedule was rather tight. Afternoon tea, music lessons, dinners, dances, equestrian training, language lessons, dancing lessons, and so on. There were too many opportunities for her to interact with different people. In that case, perhaps a particular dinner was a cover for Beyonder gatherings, or perhaps the music teacher was a senior Beyonder, and it was almost impossible for the psychology alchemists, who hid in the shadows, to investigate it when they couldn't act openly. Having said this, Audrey curiously asked, "Miss Escalante, I thought you wouldn't sell the wind-blessed potion formula since it's already at sequence 6. Heh, if there's a chance, it might be more useful to spread this information out," Escalante answered vaguely. In her mind, although Miss Audrey was a new member who had a high level of importance attached to her by the organization, she was still a new member after all. There were many things she couldn't know about. "Why?" Audrey suppressed her doubts and smiled sweetly. She asked innocently, "Miss Escalante, if this deal succeeds, can you count it as my contribution?" Escalante broke into a laugh. "Yes." Klein busied all morning until he returned to Minsk Street. He filled his stomach and prepared to rest. Only then did he have the time and opportunity to listen to prayers above the gray fog. Someone on Miss Justice's side has the human skin shadow characteristic? Seriously. Either it doesn't come or it comes in pairs. As a secret organization, the Psychology Alchemists is quite qualified in the field of resources. Klein was suddenly left in the throes of happiness from having a choice. Even if he counted the £500 which the hanged man still hadn't paid him, he only had £1,335 in cash. This didn't prevent him from seriously considering the request for a deal with the Psychology Alchemists. After thinking for a dozen seconds or so, he passed Justice's words to the hanged man to see what choice the latter would make. £3,000. Alger Wilson, who was still in Rorstead Archipelago's capital, the city of generosity, felt as if someone had struck him hard. After he became captain of the Blue Avenger, he sometimes played the role of a pirate and sometimes a law enforcer, secretly exterminating several groups of pirates. But even so, the total value of his spoils of war didn't exceed £2,000, and a portion of it had to be distributed to the sailors under him. Of course, this didn't include the ships and cannons, which were captured as they had to be handed over to the Church of the Lord of Storms. This made Alger often sigh that most pirates weren't rich, that they were used to squandering on having opulent lives. Liquor, barbecue, whores, marijuana, and gambling had drained the pirates of their money. Unless I meet a pirate crew with Beyonders, it would be very difficult to get rich so suddenly. Alger paced a few steps, then he made up his mind. He took out a gold mask from his undergarment pocket. The mask had rough facial features, and the way they were formed had the characteristics of a primitive human being from an ancient forest. Alger sat down, humbly recited the honorific name of the fool, and said, "I'm willing to use this mystical item to barter for the wind-blessed potion formula. As long as the user wears this mask, they will become extremely calm and emotionless. At the same time, they will also obtain an extremely strong, regenerative ability, exaggerated speed, and outstanding strength, as well as grasp a certain amount of black magic and primitive curse techniques. Its weakness is that as the number of times it's used increases, the wearer will become more and more unlike a human being. They will turn colder and colder, eventually treating themselves as a god." Sitting in his seat as the fool, Klein looked at the £500 note in front of him, the 5 strands of dark blue hair as thick as a tiny snake, and the simple golden mask. He tapped the edge of the long table with his finger, thinking carefully about what mystical items he could use for a trade. The all-black eye? Certainly not. This is the main ingredient of a Sequence 5 Nimble Right Master. It's just short of having little sun to obtain the method to remove the mental corruption. Dark Emperor card. This card, which cannot see the light of day, has a value countless times higher than that of a human skin shadow's characteristic. Mr. Isaac's copper whistle. At the moment, its only function is the summoning of a messenger, and it's an important tool for communication. I can't sell it. The copper whistle of the numinous episcopate member who left behind white feathers. Similarly, it can only summon a messenger, but the target on the other side of the messenger seems to be very dangerous. Sun brooch. This is something I want to use for myself. It effectively makes up for my weaknesses. Master key. It involves Mr. Door and has too many hidden secrets. In addition, just from the value of its effects, it pales in comparison to the human skin shadow's characteristic. Biological poison bottle. This is very compatible with my spirit body state. If I use it well, I can even fight a group of Beyonders. Demon hunting bullets, purifying bullets, exorcism bullets. There are not mystical items and are considered consumable Beyonder weapons. They are of very low value. The Book of Secrets? This isn't a mystical item either. The psychology alchemists likely do not lack such knowledge. At present, only the Beyonder characteristic of an interrogator can be sold. However, the psychology alchemists want mystical items. Furthermore, the trading venue is in Backlund, so it would easily expose information pertaining to Hero Bandit Dark Emperor. Klein took this opportunity to sort out what he had and finally came up with a perfect plan. He first took the form of Mr. World, manipulating him to take up a praying posture, and then he responded with a hoarse voice, "I accept the price of 2,500 pounds, but give me 2 days to raise the money." Immediately following that, Klein threw the reply scenes of the Hanged Man and the World to the Crimson Star, which symbolized Miss Justice. After receiving affirmation from Miss Justice, Klein waited patiently all afternoon at Minsk Street. It was late afternoon when the Machinery Hive Mind member, Carlson, rang his doorbell. Klein didn't ask anything further. He followed the man to the Leva Cathedral near the West Balam dock and entered a 3-story building next to the cathedral. The signboard wrote, Backlund Institute for Mechanical Research. How academic. Klein suddenly thought of the Blackthorn Security Company and cracked the corner of his lips into a smile. Under Carlson's guidance, he passed through some strange devices and found himself in a windowless room. On the long table in the room, there were many items emitting strong spirituality, including the human skin shadow characteristic and the spectre portrait frame, which was covered in black cloth. However, there were no characteristics left behind by the dead Beyonders. Obviously, the higher-ups of the Machinery Hive Mind don't want me to know about the law of indestructibility and conservation. Klein wasn't the least bit surprised. You can choose one, the hatless Ikanser pointed at the long table. Klein scrutinized the items several times before sighing. There's nothing I want. If I were to convert it into gold, how much would I get? He had already made up his mind that he wouldn't obtain the human skin shadow's characteristic from the Machinery Hive Mind. Although this could be explained as the need to create some mystical item or to try out a unique ritualistic magic, there was still a chance of exposing his own sequence. In a situation where there was a better choice, Klein didn't want to take the risk. Thus, he intended to take only money. Not only would this help him gather the 2,500 pounds that the psychology alchemists quoted, but he could also effectively dispel the Machinery Hive Mind's wariness towards him. Ikanser was visibly relieved. He smoothed his hair and answered with a smile, 1,500 pounds. However, we encourage you to choose money, so a total of 2,000 pounds. Klein immediately revealed a sincere smile. All right. Chapter 450. Distribution of Money. With the help of a bestowment ritual, Klein handed 2,500 pounds in cash and the gold mask provided by the hanged man to Miss Justice, and he used the image of the world to urge her to close the deal as soon as possible. I've spent almost 5,000 pounds in the past 2 weeks. If I didn't leave Tingen, this amount of money is enough for me to maintain a lifestyle just like my landlady's family. A doll ruins one's life. Consuming potions bankrupts you for 3 generations. 1. Klein looked at the vast fog and the ancient palace which had returned to silence. He was a little upset, as though he had lost something important. He was quiet for a few seconds before returning to the real world. He picked up the remaining 830 pounds on his desk, and he counted out 6 5-pound notes. Then Klein put the 30 pounds of cash in his now deflated wallet and stuffed it solemnly into the inside pocket of his clothes. He divided the other 800 pounds into 2 stacks, placing 1 stack in each of his side pockets. After that, Klein opened the drawer and took out 2 of the 5 deep-sea Naga hair strands that he had brought back to the real world. He wrapped them in layers after layers of paper and carefully put them into his pocket. When he was done, he took his hat and cane, and he headed for the street corner under the glow of the street lamps at night. He got on a carriage and headed for the Bravehearts Bar in the Backland Bridge area. In the heated and noisy environment, Klein insisted on finishing his glass of Southfield beer before he slowly made his way out of the bar and into a rental carriage through the thundering cheers for the boxers. Taking in the rumbling of the wheels, he intentionally closed his eyes. Suddenly, he heard the sound of the window being lightly tapped. Klein's facial muscles twitched slightly as he opened his eyes and looked in front of him. He saw the pale and exquisite Miss Sharon sitting quietly across him. Without waiting for her to question him, Klein smiled and said, "I sold the information you gave me last time for a good price, the one about the Amon family tomb." Sharon looked at him silently. Leaning his cane to the side, Klein took out 2 stacks of cash and a small clump of paper from his pocket. 800 pounds plus 2 strands of deep-sea Naga hair, for a total of about 1,000 pounds. That's what you deserve. Klein took a silent breath and smiled as he handed over the cash and paper clump. Sharon glanced at him and reached out her hand to take both items. She lowered her head, looked at the items in her hand, and asked in an ethereal voice, "How much did you sell it for?" 2,000 pounds, so we split it equally. Klein chuckled. If the machinery hive mind had only paid me 1,500 pounds according to the original plan, then I'll have to first owe you a portion of it, he thought gladly. With a flip of Sharon's bloodless hand, the cash in the paper clump disappeared without a trace. She raised her head and tersely acknowledged before asking succinctly, "What's in the tomb?" "I don't know, I didn't go." Klein didn't disclose the help he had received from the magic mirror, Arodas. For an instant he felt that if he described the experience in detail, Miss Sharon would have listened attentively with one hand on her cheek, as she had done before. "This Wraith lady seems to have a hobby of watching situational scenes and dramas or listening to all kinds of rumors," Klein summed up. Sharon's expression didn't change. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "Someone is digging a tunnel to the underground ruin." "Huh?" Klein wasn't able to react for a moment to what Sharon was talking about. However, he soon understood which underground ruin Sharon was referring to. There was only one underground ruin the two of them knew of, and that was the 4th Epoch Tudor Dynasty ruin. Someone is digging their way into the underground structure? Klein pondered for a few seconds, then he suddenly came to a realization. Is it that baronet? He had already forgotten the name of the hidden Tudor Dynasty descendant, other than knowing that he had an aristocratic title of a baronet and that he lived on Civilau Street, where the Backland police station was located. Yes, Sharon gave him a positive answer. What is he looking for? Doesn't he know that there's an evil spirit inside? Doesn't he know that all the Beyonders from his family died in there? Klein asked himself a few questions. Sharon sat up straight and replied seriously, I don't know if he knows or not. How much longer will he take to dig through? Klein asked in deliberation. Another 2 to 3 months for the time being. He's doing it on his own. Sharon provided her own judgment. Phew. Klein let out a small sigh. There's no need to rush. When I'm ready, then we can go visit him together. At this point he explained with a smile, As you know, I like to make sufficient preparations in advance. I won't get involved in anything until I advance to Faceless, he warned himself inwardly. All right. Sharon didn't ask him what he was going to do, but her figure faded quickly, and she disappeared from the carriage. Klein leaned back against the wall, feeling relaxed. The ingredients for the Faceless potion has been reserved, and I'm just waiting for the delivery. My debts have all been paid off, so there's nothing to worry about. His mood was like a fizzy wine that had settled. Occasionally there would be a little bit of joy that would silently surge upwards. The only problem is, Klein touched his left breast where there was a shriveled wallet. He sighed and said to himself silently, Only £30 in cash, 5 gold coins, and some change. Thursday afternoon. Audrey Hall was waiting in the study for the arrival of Miss Escalante. After receiving the Hanged Man's and the World's replies, she had immediately sent a servant to send a letter to Escalante. The content of the letter was very ordinary. Audrey hoped that the second psychology class, this week, would be brought forward to Thursday. In reality, Audrey had already made an agreement with Escalante. Once she expressed such an intention, it would mean that the other party had agreed to the conditions. Tick, tock. The wall clock on the wall moved briskly, and Escalante, with her waist-reaching long hair, entered the room with several teaching materials in hand. Audrey immediately gave Susie a look. The big golden retriever somewhat reluctantly leaped out. Fool sitting at the end of the long bronze table for permission to conjure the potion formula. A few seconds later, he wrote the Solar High Priest formula onto the yellowish-brown goatskin parchment in front of him. Sequence 7. Solar High Priest main ingredients. 1 comb of a dawn rooster, 1 fruit of a radiant spirit pack tree. Supplementary ingredients. 100 milliliters of a dawn rooster, 10 drops of sun essential oil, 8 grams of fingered citron powder, and 5 grams of solidified lava. Although Klein didn't deliberately pry into this potion formula, the content which was conjured thanks to him was still reflected in his mind. As long as he was willing to use dream divination to recall, he would immediately get the corresponding knowledge. He couldn't help but exclaim, Indeed, being a platform is most profitable. Derek received the piece of parchment expectantly, glancing at it with relief and excitement. Then he conjured the list of monsters which were found in the area surrounding the City of Silver, letting the Hanged Man pick out the Beyonder ingredients that would be used to level the differences in prices. Alger calmly and carefully checked the list, gaining a precise understanding of